Hello and welcome back to The Perch from the Wyoming Tribune Eagle. My name's Noah Zahn, the local government reporter here. This week, our crime and public safety reporter, Ivy Secrest, is bringing you the latest on some of the discussions that happened in Laramie at the University of Wyoming this week about considering concealed carry options on the campus there. But before we get into that, I've just got one quick story that I wrote last week that I'll bring you up to date on, and then we'll get into that. The story was about a lady by the name of Nannette Hernandez who was diagnosed with COVID in 2021 and is still seeking some answers for the financial burden that she's still trying to recover from. Whenever she first went to the hospital, she went there on referral from a clinic that said it was a matter of life and death. So she went there and received care, was in the hospital for about 3 days, and over that time amounted a bill of around $32,000. But in 2021, she was working as a waitress at a local cafe and was uninsured, so she didn't have a way to pay for it except for out-of-pocket or seeking financial aid. However, she says that she never received the financial aid that was available at the time. Her bill of $32,000 was reduced to $22,000, but I haven't heard from Cheyenne Regional Medical Center, CRMC, whether that was reduced from the federal funds they received for COVID care, or if that was a reduction for an unrelated reason. But whenever she was hospitalized, she had to leave her job because she wasn't able to go into work anymore and ended up being on oxygen for 3 months and had to stay at home and had to leave her job as a waitress. And as without a source of income, she had to move in with her mother. At the time, Nannette was 45 years old, and her son, who is 26, also moved in. And now the three of them live in a mobile home together south of Cheyenne. And she's still seeking answers on how to fund her bill as it continues to increase. She did not go to the court whenever she was summoned to it because she felt, maybe abandoned, disenfranchised, and just really hopeless is what she was telling me, and knew that she wasn't going to be able to pay off her bills. So after not going to court, she received notice that some part of her wages were going to be garnished from her new job where she works at a deli and a truck stop. And so she makes $17.30 an hour now, but she only sees about $12 of those per hour between the 25% of her wages that are garnished and some money that's now going towards health insurance and life insurance. And I mentioned earlier the federal funds that were available to CRMC. There was the uninsured funds, which made $10 billion available nationally to reimburse providers for treatment, vaccines, and vaccine administration costs for care providers to uninsured individuals. That was part of the provider relief fund that was made available through the CARES Act. Of that money, it's documented from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services that CRMC received over $3 million for COVID treatment. It's, like I mentioned earlier, it's unclear whether those funds were used to reduce Nannette's bill or not. But Nannette does know that she was denied financial assistance from CRMC's charitable care program, which to qualify for that, you have to be below the federal poverty income minimum. In 2021, at the time, that was $12,880 for a one-person household. And at the time, she was making $350 a week and uninsured, and felt that she should have qualified for that, but those funds were not made available to her. And she also notes that in her itemized bill, some of the things on there were she thought to be a bit more expensive than they should have been. For example, she was charged over $2,000 per each 100 milligram vial of remdesivir. But Gilead Sciences, who manufactures that drug, set the price of remdesivir at $390 per vial for uninsured patients. So for a total of 5 vials that she was charged over $10,000 instead for the uninsured price, which would have been under $2,000 directly from the manufacturer. However, it is important to note that it's common for hospitals to charge more for these medications for factors like the doctor's prescription, the pharmacy charge to fill the order, transportation from the pharmacy to the medication unit, administration of the medication from the registered nurse to the patients, and also the documentation that the correct medication was administered to the patient's record. But nonetheless, even over-the-counter medications that you can buy at CVS or Walgreens were still quite a bit more expensive than, you could normally buy at the pharmacy. Nannette was charged $8.01 for each 100 milligram tablet of thiamine mononitrate, which is more commonly known as a B1 vitamin. And these can be purchased in the pharmacy section of most grocery stores. And you can find a pack of 100 tablets for around $7, which is about 7 cents per tablet. So doing the math on that, Hernandez was upcharged over 11,000% for a B1 vitamin. And she says she feels this is unjust and shouldn't be living with a heavy burden like this every day. As her bill continues to grow through interest, she says it's greater now than it was whenever she initially received it. A February 2024 report from Patients' Rights Advocate, which is a nonprofit advocating for system-wide healthcare price transparency, found that nearly 2/3 of American hospitals were not compliant with the federal hospital price transparency rule, which took effect in January 2021. And this includes CRMC. And this legislation requires hospitals to make prices publicly available and easily accessible online in order to help patients understand the cost of care before they receive it. And according to that report, CRMC is compliant with all of the transparency rules except for one, which is negotiated rates. Patient rights advocates measured that by whether the hospital posted the charge that the hospital has negotiated with a third-party payer for an item or service, and they found that CRMC lists 89% of its negotiated rates as NA or non-applicable. For privacy reasons, CRMC declined to comment for this story, but they did note that sending a bill to a collections agency and potentially sending an unpaid bill through a court process are last resorts for them, used only when someone does not respond to offers of financial assistance, billing statements, or phone calls. And at the time of publication, Hernandez told me that she had yet to receive any response from CRMC and never got any offer of financial assistance from them. And the only correspondence she said she received from them after her release from the hospital has been her bills and a letter stating that she did not qualify for the hospital's charitable care program. That's all for this local news roundup. Now let's hear from Ivy on what she heard in Laramie this week.
This year, Governor Mark Gordon vetoed legislation that would have allowed conceal and carry at most facilities overseen by the state, regardless of the institution's existing policies. This would include grade schools and the University of Wyoming. The governor vetoed the legislation, reasoning that it violated the state's constitution's guarantee of a separation of power. The governor's directive discussed the potential impact of the legislation, saying that if enacted, House Enrolled Act No. 49 would require all of Wyoming's unique state facilities to receive legislative approval to restrict carrying firearms, or even to set policies as practical as proper weapon storage. This would include the University of Wyoming, Wyoming State Hospital, or the Wyoming Boys School. Now, later in his letter, he did write that, quote, "This is not a veto of the notion of repealing gun-free zones. It is a request to approach this topic with more transparency." After which he included a call to action in which he compelled school districts, community colleges, and the university to take up this conversation again and establish policies that allow safe carry of concealed weapons within their facilities. This directive inspired the University of Wyoming to restart the conversation through a questionnaire and a public comment section, which was held on September 26th during the University of Wyoming's Board of Trustees meeting. Current campus regulations prevent dangerous weapons from being carried into the university facilities, and while some exemptions can be made on a case-by-case basis by the University of Wyoming's police department, it's not necessarily common for people to be able to conceal and carry their weapons on campus. The public comment section was incredibly varied, with students, faculty, and other community members who utilized the campus space concerned about a variety of issues, whether that be an increased risk to safety with guns present on campus, or a concern about current safety and a need for guns on campus. Several community members, including students and faculty, were concerned about general safety. Sarah Bursack, a local social worker, brought up the 2022 Johns Hopkins Center for Gun Violence Solutions annual report, which stated that for the third straight year, in 2022, firearms killed more children and teens ages 1 to 17 than any other cause of death, including car crashes and cancer. The study found that in 2022, 48,204 people died from gunshots in the U.S., including 27,032 suicides.
I have been going with my son to campus since he was a baby, to walk around, to climb on the rocks, or simply to sit in the grass, enjoying relatively wind-free moments in the sun. These times were filled with a sense of gratitude for the peacefulness of the environment. We would simply no longer feel safe to come to campus if firearms were allowed. The presence of guns would forever change the experience of feeling safe on campus with or without my child.
That was Sarah, mostly concerned as a mother about bringing her child to campus anymore if the conceal and carry policy were to be allowed within the boundaries of campus. Her and her child have been attending the university to utilize the outdoor spaces since he was a child, or since he was a baby, as she referenced in her quote, and her major concern is about safety in that space, even though the broader area of Laramie does allow conceal and carry, as does the broader state of Wyoming. Several students also took the opportunity to express their concerns. Elementary education major Liz Pearson was joined by several peers talking about suicide and safety. Pearson, while she was majorly concerned with the risk of suicide with guns on campus, she also was very vocal about wanting to transfer schools if conceal and carry rules were to change.
My name is Liz Pearson. I am a UW student majoring in elementary education, and I'm here to share why I believe that guns on campus would pose a safety issue and exacerbate the mental health crisis. So to start off, we have to understand that campuses are already relatively safe. The National Institute of Health suggests that campuses are safer than the community in which they're located.
That was Pearson discussing the likelihood of a very common argument from the other side, which is that guns can be used as a defensive purpose. So this is this classic, a good guy with a gun stops a bad guy with a gun type argument. Pearson brought up in her testimony that according to the NRA, 0.5% of U.S. citizens have used their guns for defensive purposes. So she was really just trying to illustrate how rare it is for a good guy with a gun to stop a bad guy with the gun in the case of school shootings, which are becoming increasingly more common in the U.S.
Furthermore, most civilians and teachers are not trained to use firearms in terms of conflict. Now, while Wyoming may have more trained gun users than other states, how many people can say that they have successfully stopped a crime or interfered with the use of a firearm? I'll answer that for you. That according to the NRA, 0.5% of U.S. citizens have used their guns for defensive purposes. The probability that having guns on campus would actually stop a shooting or a crime is much less than the probability of it increasing successful suicide attempts.
Students weren't the only ones to take the opportunity to come and speak to the board. On the side of the faculty, the University of Wyoming Art Museum Education and Public Programs Coordinator Will Bowling and Assistant Professor and Director of Creative Writing Molly McCauley Brown expressed their concerns about safety in the classroom, mainly in regards to this fear of school shootings. While the University of Wyoming hasn't had a major on-campus shooting incident, guns on campus in the U.S. are a hot topic and aren't uncommon for shootings to occur in a campus setting. Brown brought up a unique point to the board as she is disabled and was utilizing a wheelchair during public comment. She's told the board that every semester she has ever taught on a college campus, somewhere in the U.S. there has been an on-campus shooting. Brown has also had to ensure that her students know not to wait for her in the event of a shooting, because taking the time to help her out of the way with her disability could put them at a greater risk.
I'm acutely aware of the ways my disability would make it harder for me to help protect them and might even put them at increased risk.
Brown also elaborated on the role of a professor, talking about how college, unlike high school or elementary school, you're really starting to probe students to think more critically, and you're having much tougher conversations with students, especially in the creative writing role, which she holds. She talked about how she wasn't sure how professors could be expected to mediate and maintain these difficult and sometimes heated conversations if they were aware that their students and or any passerby could potentially be carrying and respond emotionally to what is going on in the classroom. Another unique perspective, Will Bowling, another professor, brought up kind of this idea of what it means to be a gun owner and to still want some sort of gun safety on campus. Bowling was also against changing the status quo, so not interested in changing this current no guns policy on campus. Bowling identified as a hunter and brought up that he found that it's especially concerning, the idea of having guns on campus, because within the art museum where he works, the facilities also host grade school students in addition to college students.
While I would fear for my safety as an educator and a faculty member, my real fear is for every student, pre-kindergarten through graduate student, because they deserve access to quality educational engagement without fear for their safety. Changing this policy undermines basic common sense public safety measures, and it will inevitably result in unnecessary harm. Please do not compromise the well-being of your students, your faculty, your staff, and your constituents. Thank you for your time.
Not all of the speakers were against the idea of guns. There are actually quite a few community members and students who did talk about wanting the policy to change because of these kind of classic good guy with a gun stopping a bad guy with a gun idea. One University of Wyoming law student, Brandon Calloway, stands out to me. He really dug into this idea of what security actually means and what a threat actually is. He talked a lot about the idea that it might feel safe, but it isn't necessarily statistically safer to not have guns on campus, and he cited his own set of statistics for that.
True security doesn't come from avoiding threats, but from being prepared to confront them. Mr. Chairman and members of the Board of Trustees, my name is Brandon Calloway. I'm a third-year law student at the College of Law. Before law school, I served 10 years in the U.S. Navy in and alongside specialized units. I'm trained in defensive combat operations and have trained others in tactical response, both at home and overseas. During my military career, I learned the critical importance of preparedness and how to respond effectively to unpredictable threats. I'm here today to advocate for revising Regulation 6-4 to allow unlimited, permitless concealed carry on campus, because this is not just about rights. It's about safety and survival based on logic and reasoning rather than emotion. In my deployments to the Middle East, I've seen how attackers often choose soft targets, places where people are unarmed and defenseless. Our current policy makes the University of Wyoming a soft target. When law-abiding citizens are disarmed, it creates an environment where those intent on doing harm know that they will not face an immediate resistance. Banning firearms on campus creates a false sense of security. It may seem safe, it may feel safe, but it leaves the campus community vulnerable to real threats.
Calloway also wasn't the only military member to speak. There was a former Vietnam veteran who came and spoke about not wanting the conceal and carry policy, but there was also Curtis Silvernail, who didn't necessarily identify himself as a student, but also brought up his military experience and talked about how he felt that guns on campus would be useful in the event of the active shooter, especially because of how rural Wyoming is. Mainly tapping into this idea of like the average response time of local law enforcement is pretty close to the length of the average shooting. So having community members who could respond potentially before police arrive and might have more information on the situation than police are able to garner in a timely manner might be useful. This conversation really did center around the future potential shootings. There wasn't much of an argument to be made by community members to have guns on campus for reasons outside of safety, or to not have guns on campus for reasons outside of safety. While most of the speakers who came and talked to the board really were either completely against having any sort of gun on campus or were completely for having full unrestricted access to guns on campus. There was at least a few who were more interested in this middle ground. Noah Zahn, a graduate student in mental health counseling, kind of addressed this idea with the board.
It is my belief that it is essential to uphold the right to bear arms. It is also my belief that it is equally important to create a safe learning environment. I am in support of concealed carry on campus with specific requirements being met. The responsible, trained firearm owner is the backbone of our country and our community.
So was Noah Zahn talking about how people who are already comfortable breaking the current policies will continue to break the current policies. There's no way to really check every student to see if they're carrying against school policy unless they get caught in some fashion. So he would prefer for people who are trained to be able to have those guns on campus so that we can kind of deter people who aren't trained that are likely already taking guns on campus, though this information wasn't necessarily verified by the University of Wyoming police or any University of Wyoming official. Like, no one was ever really able to confirm that guns are actually on campus. The conversation was really one-sided as they're taking public comment, and the board hasn't made any sort of formal decision about whether they're going to maintain current policies, whether they're going to follow the directive and find some way to integrate policies that allow guns on the campus into their current, if they're going to pass policies that allow guns onto campus. There's no deadline for a decision to be made. Really, this was just a call to action from the governor, not necessarily some sort of mandate. And the survey by which they were taking comment outside of this public session have now closed. So it's hard to say what direction the Board of Trustees is going to go in with this, but overall it really was kind of a balanced pushback from the community about whether or not this is something they would even want. And the board will have to consider, do they want to lose students by changing this policy? Do they want to put faculty at risk, or do they see this as protecting faculty and students? And do they think that this policy, if they were to change it, would attract a different type of student to the University of Wyoming to replace those students that they would be losing?
That was Ivy Secrest, our crime and public safety reporter, on concealed carry discussions at the University of Wyoming. Now we've got Taylor Staples, our arts and entertainment reporter, bringing us a story you've been working on and a discussion for us. What's going on here?
Yeah, so a few weeks ago I wrote a story on Camelot. It's been running every single weekend at the Mary Godfrey Playhouse in Cheyenne since September 20th, and this upcoming weekend for October 5th and 6th is its last weekend. And people can check it out at 7:30 p.m. and also the Sunday matinees at 2 p.m. So Camelot, just for a quick summary, is based on a story by Jay Lerner about King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table. So because it's its last weekend, I kind of wanted to ask you guys, what are your favorite musicals, plays, shows, any of the sorts?
So when it comes to musicals, I think my experience is more along the movie musical persuasion, just because,
Same.
Yeah, I'm from Denver. Like, there are some great musicals that come through, but it's not like being in New York. You don't go and like see shows in person. I really love Six. Six is a phenomenal, fun musical to kind of see. And then I'm also a huge fan of Tick, Tick, Boom and Rent. Just because I love the story behind the two and how Tick, Tick, Boom is kind of the story of how we got to Rent. And I don't know, I think that's really sweet and heartwarming.
Yeah, no, I'm literally the same way. Movie musicals are, Mamma Mia, I have seen on Broadway, not legit Broadway. I have to stop saying that because I've also never seen like a real Broadway show in New York. Like Chicago Broadway is just not the same. But no, Mamma Mia is awesome. The movie, low key, better than the musical I saw. But that's just my take. Into the Woods, the movie musical is awesome. In the Heights, not Into the Heights, is awesome. La La Land is awesome. Also, big fan of Tick, Tick, Boom. I feel badly. iconic, literally iconic. No, 6 is probably my favorite though. I just love the costumes. They're all glittery. They're all colorful. You can clearly differentiate between each of Henry VIII's 6 wives. I think it's awesome. Yeah. And there's a song in there for everyone.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think like movie musicals and musicals in general are definitely something that you only get into when like other people introduce you to them. So like for me, it was my grandpa listens to the Les Miserables soundtrack constantly. He is obsessed with it, loves it, has seen it several times. And so I just like listened to that all the time and then started watching it when I was like old enough and it was appropriate for me to watch. And it's just, yeah, like I think you just start kind of having a love for it, and hopefully everyone feels that way about Camelot.
Yeah, I don't have too much to contribute to this conversation. I don't think I've ever seen a musical live. I guess in high school, I went to 1 or 2 of those productions there. But I think the first one I seen was Phantom of the Opera on a movie version of it. And same with Fiddler on the Roof. I really liked that one. It was good music.
Love it.
Yeah.
I mean, what else could you ask for in a musical?
Yeah.
Good music.
Well, that's all for this week. Thank you, Taylor Staples and Ivy Secrest, for contributing to this week's episode. Be sure to tune back in next week.